We strive to be a community of radical welcome and deep connection, creating meaningful relationships among people of many beliefs and life experiences. We welcome you all, seekers, believers, atheists, agnostics, and those who defy labels. We welcome you, gay, straight, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender individuals. We welcome you, imperfect, sad, happy, confused, curious human beings, and we strive to share inspiration and love.
Good morning. In honor of the Persian New Year, which occurred this past week, my opening words this morning are a Sufi folk tale about the character Mullah Nasruddin. He is the often satirical protagonist of a whole host of teaching stories told throughout the Muslim world. So one day, a neighbor whom Mullah Nasruddin did not like came to see him. And the neighbor asked Nasruddin, "May I borrow your donkey? I need to go to the market." Nasruddin did not want to lend his donkey to this neighbor whom he didn't like. And so he told him, "I would be very glad to lend you my donkey. But unfortunately, my brother came yesterday and asked me the very same favor. He has taken my donkey to the next town to carry his wheat harvest to the mill for grinding into flour. Sadly, the donkey is not here." "Oh, too bad. Thanks anyway," said the neighbor, and he turned around to go home. He had taken only a few steps when suddenly, "Ee-haw, ee-haw," he hears Mullah Nasruddin's donkey let out a big, long bray. The neighbor turned back to Mullah Nasruddin. "Mullah," he said, "I thought you said your donkey was not here." "He is not," said Mullah Nasruddin. "But I just heard him bray," said the neighbor. Mullah Nasruddin turned to his neighbor and said, "My friend, who are you going to believe? Me or a donkey?" The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. These are the immortal words of Saint Gloria Steinem. Though in truth, she herself may have adapted them from an earlier source, actually from an Alcoholics Anonymous booklet published in the 1970s that admonished its readers, "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." This summer and into this year, I think a lot of white Missourians have gotten some miserable truth. When the town of Ferguson, Missouri hit rock bottom after the death of Michael Brown, white Missourians who thought they lived in a just society of protection under the law, or who perhaps thought they were living in a post-racial America, were forced to see a different reality play out in reports of rampant racial bias in our justice system, and even widespread economic exploitation of African American citizens and the working poor through a system of unevenly applied legal fees and funding municipal governments by funneling people into the justice system. All truths we've recently learned or had confirmed by the recent Department of Justice report. At the time that this all was happening, a dear friend of mine from St. Louis told me this: "Watching the protests and the militarized police response play out in Ferguson made me feel physically ill, because I was forced to see this other truth about the world I live in. And it's a terrible truth, where my black neighbors live in a system that terrorizes them. And it's the more terrible because I don't even seem to live in the same system. Because I can go through my life pretending it isn't true. Sweet it is to sleep in the coolness of snug unawareness. Snug unawareness, cozy ignorance. Can't we just go back to it being a post-racial America where everyone gets a fair shot? The America, in the word of Langston Hughes, that never was, but still must be. If I ignore the truth hard enough, if I blockade the door against the sunlight hammering its firm knuckles, can I please live in a world that is good and fair and true? But the thing is, that America never has been. That world never was. If I want that America, if I want to live in that world, I have to tear down my false, cozy truth first and build a new one that is wider and truer. And to do that, I have to be willing to see and hear miserable truths about the world I actually live in. We cannot join in co-creating a story of solidarity and mutual flourishing until we learn the stories that are not the ones we tell ourselves. Plato once said, "Those who tell the stories rule society." Contemporary theorists tell us the flip is also true. Those who rule society get to tell the story. White America generally accepts our experience of the world as normative because ours is the story that gets told by the powers that be, the history, the culture that gets told. But as we learned this summer and at other times throughout our lives and our history, white culture is the matrix. It is enforced as the narrative, the reality of our world, but this monolithic vision isn't really real. Take the little red pill. Pull back the veil of the normative cultural narrative, and there is hard truths to go around. There isn't just one story. There are at least two truths, and probably a whole lot more. The story that policing is a dangerous job. The story of Darren Wilson, truly afraid for his life in his work, is only part of the story. There's also the story of Michael Brown, unarmed and afraid for his life in a system and culture that devalues it. There's the story of a town's mostly white government funding its budget with fees disproportionately gained by funneling African American residents into the justice system with small charges like jaywalking, the charge for which Brown was stopped by Wilson. Charges that are something like 20 times more frequent in Ferguson than the national average, and 90% of which are charged against black and brown individuals. So that's a story. And then there's the cultural story of black and brown bodies as criminal and in need of control, a story perpetuated from the time of slavery forward and written into the founding of our country. There's the historical story of an economy and government literally built upon the monetization of black lives. These stories and more all existed in that moment, pulsed in the conscious and unconscious of every individual involved, with tragic results, in part because they were unacknowledged. Nigerian author Chimamanda Adichie writes, "It is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging all of the stories of that place and of that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. A single story robs people of dignity. And yet shining the harsh sunlight on these other realities is psychologically painful. Facing the unpleasant stories that live not only in our culture, but also enculturated into our own psyches. Facing the miserable truths about the world and ourselves threatens the story we want to tell about us as compassionate, ethical, good people living in a just and fair society. We begin to feel the truth threatens our own dignity. So we lie to ourselves. Noam Chomsky has pointed out that self-deceit is often how the educated elite find themselves able to support oppressive power structures they would never explicitly support. We want to live as ethical actors in a just world, but the world makes that so hard to do. And so we find ourselves deceiving ourselves about the extent of the truth we live in. In an article on self-deception in Psychology Today, Dr. Stephen Diamond writes, "When the objective facts threaten the ego and its integrity, we experience what social psychologists call confirmation bias. We dismiss certain facts incompatible with our myth of ourselves in favor of other, less threatening and more corroborative ones. We twist the truth, and we become convinced of the veracity of this twisted truth, and we do it all unconsciously. We don't even know we're doing it. When there are many stories, but we want only one, we pick the one that confirms our desire of the world. And we don't even know we're doing it. So what is the antidote? The first piece is to consciously acknowledge the vast number of stories about our world. The truth cannot set us free. It cannot be a force of collective liberation unless we are first willing to see it and let it make us deeply uncomfortable, perhaps even miserable. Our liberation begins with rooting out the stories we tell ourselves in order to stay comfortably entrenched in the structures that are. Our liberation begins with the truth that will set us free. When we are open to both sides of the story, to all sides of the story, to diverse and multiple truths, when we listen and learn to as many stories as we can, we loosen our hold on the mono story we tell ourselves. When we free our grip from the story that feels best, we open our arms to embrace a whole wide world, to grasp our neighbor's hand, to work together, tearing down the stories that imprison us and loosing ourselves into a larger, more life-giving narrative. Many stories restore dignity. When we let the light shine on two truths or more, we open the way for transformation. Together, it is our deeper truths that will indeed set us free. We have something of a tradition here of viewing life itself and our experiences as a sacred text open to our interpretation and sharing stories from our own journey. And when I learned recently about the work that Becca Kastner does, I thought she must tell a story of faith at this service. And so I'm very lucky that she was willing to do so. And Becca, thank you for sharing with us today.
In 1959, the social psychologist Milton Rokiak brought together 3 patients at Ypsilanti State Hospital near Ann Arbor, Michigan. All 3 men claimed that they were Jesus Christ. The purpose of Dr. Rokiak's study, which he described in his book, The 3 Christs of Ypsilanti, was to examine the beliefs of these men and how they might change when confronted with the situation of more than one person claiming the same identity. The three men met with the researchers regularly over the course of 2 years. When confronted with the conundrum of their overlapping identities, they gave a variety of rationalizations. One man said the other two were dead. He took an approach of denial to the situation and watched the two dead men fight it out from the sidelines. The second man said that the others were crazy, obviously because they were in a mental hospital. The third man gave a number of more complicated explanations, and when those were ultimately challenged, his pat response became, "That's your belief, sir." By all objective measures, these three men were delusional. Not only did they independently claim the same identity, they claimed the identity of a deity and formed complex systems of beliefs surrounding this identity. According to the American Psychiatric Association, delusions are fixed beliefs that are not amenable to change in the light of conflicting evidence. But when do beliefs become delusions? When does believing that Jesus Christ was a man who walked the earth turn into Jesus was born of immaculate conception and was the Son of God, and he performed miracles and rose from the dead? And when do these beliefs about Jesus Christ, the individual, turn into a person believing that they can talk to Jesus and get a tangible response, or hear a response from Jesus, or believe they are Jesus? At what point does the truth for one person surpass the truth that another is willing to accept? As philosophical as these questions may sound, they have real implications in my work at the intersection of psychology and the law. I am asked to identify to the courts if defendants with mental illnesses have a rational understanding of the court system and the case against them. In my recent experiences, I have been challenged with the fact that my reality as a white woman of the justice system is very different from the reality of the justice system for many others. But at what point does acknowledging the truth of legal prejudice lead to more extreme beliefs about the justice system? Are judges biased? Do prosecutors and judges conspire against defendants? Do police frame people for crimes? Are public defenders fully committed to defending their clients? Where do we draw the line between truth and paranoid delusions? And who am I to tell someone that their truth is in my gray area? Truth was a topic that rose from time to time in the meetings of the three Christs. The third man responded to questions of truth with phrases such as, "God is truth, he cannot lie. Truth is truth, and truth is self-evident." But is it? The second man said about truth, "If it hurts too much, man is wise to turn away from it." However, the researchers constructed a situation in which this man had to sign a statement that contradicted his belief in order to get something he desperately wanted. When confronted with the predicament of publicly disavowing the belief that he was Jesus, though he could still maintain the belief internally, he couldn't do it. He could not tell a lie when to lie was to deny what he believed. In the end, the three Christs of Ypsilanti underwent little change in their beliefs in the years they spent in close proximity. They had a number of disputes with increasing challenges and interventions from the researchers. At the same time, they were observed to form a camaraderie and closeness in their daily lives. Dr. Rokiak concludes his book with the following: "And, finally, we have learned that even when a summit of three is composed of paranoid men, deadlocked over the ultimate in human contradiction, they prefer to seek ways to live with one another in peace rather than to destroy one another."
I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. These are the immortal words of the Saturday Night Live character Stuart Smalley, a self-help guru played by comedian and now U.S. Senator Al Franken. He's poking fun, of course, at the self-help genre conceit that if we think something hard enough, if we act like it's true, then it will be true. And he may have been onto something. In an episode on deception the National Public Radio show on science and meaning called Radiolab investigated several neuropsychological studies on the subject of self-deception and its results. The findings were fairly clear. The better you are at lying to yourself, the happier and more successful you are likely to be. One study asked athletes preparing for a big competition to submit themselves to a widely accepted psychological instrument that tests for self-deception. And then they watched as the most convinced self-liars overwhelmingly won their races. Another study performed brain imaging to discover that lying lights up the parts of the brain that have to do with higher functions, like creativity, imagination, and making complex connections. Still another study applied the self-deception instrument to different groups of clinically depressed and non-depressed individuals. And guess what? The people who were happiest were the ones who were lying to themselves the most. The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. Listen to what radiologist... That was perfectly timed. Thank you. Listen to what radiologist and psychiatrist Harold Sackheim has to say about this. Depressed people see all the pain in the world. They see how horrible people are with each other. And they tell you everything about themselves, all their weaknesses, all the terrible things they've done to other people. And the problem is, they're right. And so maybe the way we help people is to help them be wrong. He says, we are so vulnerable to being hurt. Perhaps we are given the capacity to distort as a gift. We're given the capacity to distort as a gift. When we see the truth as painful, when we see the world as harsh, the problem so often is that we are right. And so we twist the truth to make it through. Might we even say that hope itself is another word for a good lie? Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "The visionary lies to himself, the liar only to others." In a world that is often as brutal as it is beautiful, we are given the capacity to imagine the world we wish for, and then spectacularly the capacity to believe it's possible. You might call this religion. For is living as if we were in the world we imagine not just what we do as people of faith? Faith, incidentally, which we could also handily name self-deception or even delusion. By the definition that Becca gave us of delusion, a fixed belief held even in the face of evidence to the contrary. All kinds of religious belief walk that line. Religious liberals are fond of calling conservative religious belief delusional, to our own shame. But I would point out that as Unitarian Universalists, even some of our humanist truth claims could be considered delusion. We believe that human beings are capable of great good, despite every piece of evidence to the contrary. Every proof showing us how routinely we mess up and fall short of our highest ideals. We believe that building a better world by human means is possible, even though we see our efforts bungled, misguided, prone to harm instead of help, and foiled by the greater powers of the universe. Are these beliefs delusion? Hope? Faith? Of course, The line, as Becca defined between belief and delusion, has to do with being amenable to changing belief in the presence of contrary evidence. An openness and humility of belief that we do routinely preach here at the Unitarian Universalist Church and in many other liberal religious settings. But the thing is, I don't want to change those beliefs. I want to hang on to them. And come to think of it, I don't want to let go of any of my wilder faith claim delusions either. The ones that declare that a creative love is the most powerful force in the universe. The beliefs that proclaim love wins, always, even as we watch it lose again and again. Love is a powerful force. Love wins. I embrace these wild beliefs. I seek to live them in everything I do, even in a world where the truth can be terrible. Especially then. Because there's a deeper and more mysterious human capacity at play than the one to self-deceive. And perhaps that is the capacity to hold paradox. To know the truth of a broken and brutal world, and to know at the same time the truth of a world made holy and whole. For religious faith never is only wild delusion. It contains faith and hope, but it also contains prophetic truth-telling and lamentation. Religious faith is clear-sighted and starry-eyed. It names the world as it is, names it ruthlessly, and believes just as fiercely in the world that will be, the world that perhaps we see already in bits and pieces of glory all around us. Religious faith tells the hardest truths and the most beautiful lies, all at once. So yes, I'm preaching this morning my single-sentence sermon. As people of faith, we must and must not lie to ourselves. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church. The truth will set us free when we are frank and real enough about our world and its many stories to know that we must imagine better and believe it possible. For once we've dismantled the lies of greed and hatred and separation, we will need the faith to build a true new way of peace and flourishing and freedom. So let us tell the miserable truth, and let us hold tight to the most life-giving lies, and let that be our living faith. Because we're good enough, we're worthy, and doggone it, people like us can heal the world. We're good enough, we're worthy, and doggone it, people like us can heal the world. We're good enough, we're worthy, and doggone it, people like us can heal the world. Amen. And we've been sharing during this stewardship time a moment during the service, a stewardship moment from a member among us, and we are very grateful this morning to hear from Sam Otten. Thank you, Sam.
Our theme this month is truth, and that led me to a question. Have you had moments where you can't be 100% your true self? Maybe it's at work where you have to wear a fake smile, or at family gatherings where you have to suppress certain opinions, or when you're with a friend and you have to make that tough choice between taking their side or pointing out that they may have made a mistake. I think these things are normal, at least I hope they're normal. And I don't mean to suggest that this is in any way bad to be less than 100% authentic sometimes. But I also think that when it comes to spiritual growth and deep connection, it's essential to have the opportunity to be 100% yourself. I grew up regularly attending a Presbyterian church in Michigan. It was pretty early on that I started to think that the Bible stories I was learning in Sunday school seemed very much like the stories and mythologies of countless other cultures. It didn't make sense to my 10-year-old self that this one set of stories was to be taken as true, while all the rest of those stories were clearly false. Pay no mind to the fact that billions of other people are being taught that their stories are true, and the rest, including the Bible stories, are false. I had all these thoughts and realizations, but I felt like I had to hide this part of myself, especially at church. Eventually, in high school, I began talking to my dad about it. I found that he also shared lots of doubts about the Old Testament. But at that time, I couldn't bring myself to also challenge my dad on the New Testament. I thought the New Testament was just as fantastical as the Old Testament and was a mixed bag at best with regard to the moral teachings, whereas my dad seemed to clasp pretty strongly to a few core teachings that he agreed with in the New Testament while ignoring other parts of it. So, although I could reveal a bit more of myself to my dad, I still wasn't anywhere near 100%. In college, I attended a Lutheran church because I knew a guitar player there, and I joined the praise band with him. I played in that praise band for several years, but I was only there for the music. I had completely checked out of the biblical teachings and Jesus-centric messages, and so I just pretended to go along. By grad school, I was engaged to Chelsea, and one of the reasons I fell in love with her was because of our great conversations about religion and humanism, morality and values. I was able to open up to her, but I had given up hope that there was a religious community where I could be 100% myself. And then there was UU. I love this community because I can actually get 100% on board with the principles and the messages that are shared here, even when they're contradictory. I don't feel scared or ashamed of opening up about what I actually believe, whether that's in a chalice circle or up here in front of all of you. I feel supported in my current beliefs, but I also feel supported in striving for personal growth. And it's not just spirituality. The other aspects of my life are welcome here as well. I'm able to participate in music. I have Chelsea here with me. Our children are downstairs right now having a wonderful experience. And I've even found a few other adult men here who share my enthusiasm for comic books. We even had a superhero Sunday, if you can believe that. So I'm very thankful to be 100% myself while I'm here. And it feels like the least I can do is to give back some small percentage of my income as a donation to the church. I think of it as a thank you gift, but also as an investment because this community is helping me grow. I was thrilled when I learned that the stewardship goal this year was 100% participation from potential pledgers. That goal allows us to commit 100% to sustaining a community that welcomes and nourishes each of us to be our true selves.
Thank you so much, Sam.